So, there's a video that has been making the rounds on social media called "If Someone Doesn't Understand Privilege, Show Them This." And the video shows a large group of maybe 50 or 60 college-age kids who are told to line up on a grassy field and told by an announcer that they're going to have a running race and whoever wins the race gets a $100 bill. And then he says that he's going to introduce some conditions and says if he's going to make some statements, and if one of these statements applies to you, each time one statement applies to you, take a step forward. First, he says, if both your parents are still married, or if you're married, obviously, if both your parents are still married, if your parents are still married to each other, take a step forward. And so, a bunch of the people take a step forward. And then he says, if you grew up with a father figure in the home, take a step forward. Now, one of the things that keeps happening in the video is the kids keep taking these, when they take these steps, I'm linking the video below, by the way, when the kids take these steps, they don't just step forward, they take these like giant leaps, like both feet are leaving the ground to make these jumps that they're making. So, there has to have been some instruction that we didn't hear, but setting that aside, he goes on and on in this vein, and sure enough, and it goes on to, you've had access to this, that, or the other. You haven't had to do this, that, or the other. And sure enough, by the end of his announcements of these conditions, you've got most of the people, especially the ethnic minorities, all the way at the back for the most part, and then most of the other kids, mostly white, are about halfway down the field. And he makes the point that none of these things are things you did for yourself. None of these things are things you achieved. You were just born into this. This was supposed to make me understand my privilege. I still don't understand it. And I'm not saying that to be obstinate. I'm not saying that to be sarcastic. There's just this giant gap of confusion in what I'm apparently supposed to take away from this. There's something here that I don't get. And I feel like, they talk about the liberal versus conservative being a disconnect between left brain and right brain almost, that you've got one political party that's trying to think in terms of one political persuasion, I should say, trying to think in terms of the part of the brain that's based on feelings and emotions, and the other side that's trying to think in terms of cold, hard logic. And both of those things lose out when they don't intermingle, when they don't work together. Both of those perspectives lose out. So, like, to that right-brained, emotion-sided aspect of oneself, it feels like there's some kind of profound point that's been made, because emotion has been triggered, or I don't mean triggered in the college snowflake sense, but triggered in the sense of incurred, created. Like it's that right-brained idea of like, well, if I caused emotions to be affected, then the argument's correct. Like, that's as far as logic goes in that side, and that's that liberal kind of left-leaning perspective. And so anyone that comes at that with any kind of confusion or curiosity is immediately, I think, branded as conservative. And I don't identify as conservative. I identify as libertarian, because I have to kind of step back from this, obviously. But conservatism, the GOP, all of that, I have no support for that, no sympathy for that. But what's interesting to me, okay, so what do you want me to learn? Did you want me to learn that some people have less than I do and some people have more than I do? Because I figured that out a long time ago. Did you want me to be considerate towards those who are less fortunate than me? Because I learned that a long time ago. Do you want me to be grateful for the advantages I've had in life? Because I am. It's like I don't understand what it is that I'm supposed to get out of this. What is supposed to change? And it's where that's part of why I identify as a libertarian, because while I can't be conservative, my actual values, go down the list: pro-choice, pro-drug legalization, all of that. My values are very much kind of left-sounding or left-leaning. I don't hear solutions coming from the left, so I can't throw my lot in with the left because I don't hear actual viable, on-the-ground, workable solutions. Now, conservatives seem to want to try to offer solutions to problems, but they don't seem to be they seem to be solutions that are devoid of the human element. And that's what I was talking about, that these two sides are kind of disconnected. They're at this eternal disconnect, apparently not understanding that they're supposed to work together, which is essentially what Jordan Peterson and others have been saying. It's like, look, you've got to you've got to be a uniter, not a divider. As I say this, and that I genuinely don't understand what it is that they're talking about, or what it is that they want me to take away from this, I want to look at those first couple of points that he made. I'm supposed to feel guilty or feel made aware of something because my parents are still together. My parents stayed together. And for my sake, yeah. I don't. It seems like what Ayn Rand called hatred of the good for being good. You're right that I had nothing to do with my parent. Well, aside from the fact that my upbringing being I'm sure a uniting factor to some large degree. You're right that I did not. I didn't do anything to keep my parents together, per se. But what am I? How am I? What am I supposed to take away from that? Why is my parents staying together a smack in the face to someone else? I don't get that. And what's interesting, and then he goes on to say, grew up with a father figure in the house, and this is where we talk about the idea of intersectionality, which actually, if you think about it, intersectionality is really a tool, a very ironic tool to show how these systems, so-called systems of oppression, or these so-called logical interpretations of systematic oppression or whatever, or systemic oppression, don't make sense. Because on the one hand, there's no, it's kind of like feng shui, where it just varies. It's supposed to be a science, but it just varies based from person to person. There's no constants because they're constantly ruling each other out. They're constantly contradicting each other. And what I'm referring to is the idea, okay, he says, you're privileged if you grew up with a father figure in the home. Okay, now understand when I get into, I'm going to use an example here. I don't think I think lesbian couples, gay lesbian couples, are perfectly capable of raising children. It comes down to the individuals and what values they bring and how they impart those values. I think they're perfectly capable of doing it. Now, I want that to be clear, very clear, and very understood. But for the sake of argument, so are you saying, I feel like Kathy Newman there, but are you suggesting then, or do you mean to suggest that lesbian couples, that if you've been raised by a lesbian couple, you're not privileged, you're being taken a step back? Because lesbian couples might take offense to that. And it's funny to me because we dance around the issue of fatherlessness, and it's funny, it's like, if you suggest that maybe, just maybe, it's good to have a father figure in the home, then somehow you are catapulted into this wacko realm of extreme social ostracization as some kind of men's rights activist or something. But then turn it around and based on your intersectional totem pole status, you're maybe allowed to comment on fatherlessness. Maybe you are, maybe you aren't. And it's such a weird thing because we have to dance around it because like this guy can bring this up as a point of privilege if you had a father figure in the home growing up. And he says father figure too, so that could be your stepdad or your mom's boyfriend or whatever, but just a father figure. Anyway, he identifies that as a sign of privilege, but at the same time, Adam Carolla, who is a libertarian, maybe more conservative type of person, made the same comment on his radio show and attracted extraordinary backlash for it. Now, again, I don't like to say, well, you have to have, I don't want to be one of the people that tries to make the argument of like you have to have a father figure in the home because again, it comes down to the individual. We can never lose sight of the fact that it comes down to the individual. Some men would make great father figures. Some men would not. The idea that having a father figure by default raises things one way or the other, I think, is still is not a good. Even if you can make a broad spectral analysis that on the whole it's a good thing, I still defer to individual cases because that's where we need to keep, for the sake of individual rights and individual freedoms, that's what we always need to delineate to. So that all of that said, again, I don't understand what I'm supposed to. What do you want from me? Because you're right. It's not anything I did, but it is something that two people did on my behalf to help me. So it seems like what we're looking at here is trying to solve generational issues within one generation. It seems like that's what they're hinting at, and I'm guessing here. I don't want to be setting up a straw man, but it seems like that's what they're hinting at. They're hinting at the idea that men are like you've got these generational issues that somehow we're supposed to solve in one generation. So why not and this is what I'm asking, like why not if you're concerned about two-parent households, kids not growing up in two-parent households, then why are you not encouraging the current generation to marry and stay married and raise kids in a two-parent household so that the next generation can benefit from that? Because that's supposed to be the American dream. That's supposed to be the model, is that you can work hard and develop, and over time, your life gets better. The lives of your children and grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and so on get better over time. And that model is not perfect. It's not going to turn everything around overnight. It's not a genie in a bottle. It's not going to flip a switch and make everything right. But it seems like that should be the message that you should be imparting going forward. Yes, there is hierarchical difference, and as has been pointed out by Jordan Peterson and others, there will always be hierarchical difference. But the issue becomes within that within that, what are the mechanisms to move up the hierarchy? Because that's the question. It's not, can we somehow find a way to make people further up the hierarchy climb back down the totem pole and replace them with other people? It's what can we do to make it more possible and more available to more people? The other thing is, the other strong objection I have to this line of logic is the idea that there is an artificial limitation put on the hierarchy in question. You should, ask the question then, broaden the scope. Broaden the scope. Take 2 steps forward if you were born in the United States. Take 2 steps forward if you were born into a country where your right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness was enshrined in law. Because I know the immediate knee-jerk reaction is to say, oh, well, the cops don't this, or the law is not applied the same. Wait. do we have that law? Do we have those rights enshrined into law? Because that gives us a basis to petition the government to improve situations and to readdress grievances. And that alone sets us apart from a whole lot of the country. Take 2 steps forward. If you live in a country where you have access to power 24 hours a day because you're the power company, because, note that clarification, because the power company is able to keep it going 24 hours a day, instead of, say like Iraq, where they have rolling blackouts every day. Take 2 steps forward if you live in a country where the people have the right to elect and remove their leaders from office. Take 2 steps forward if you live in a country where the divine right of kings is not enshrined into law. You can keep going and going with this. And the problem is, when you don't expand it, when you don't acknowledge that even those kids at the back of the race that were being held back in the race that he set up, when you don't acknowledge that even those kids are doing better than millions and millions of people in the world, then you do something that I think is heinous and horrendous to those kids, which is you teach them to limit their view, to not think of others, to not think of the world at large, to not think of those less fortunate than themselves, and assume that they're somehow at the flatline bottom of the human experience, when in reality they're way, way closer to the top than other people. And there are a lot of other people. Take 2 steps forward if your mother doesn't have to walk 10 miles a day to get drinking water. Take 2 steps forward if you're able to go to the park and play without worrying about stepping on landmines. Take 2 steps forward if you live in a country where it's illegal to marry children. I mean, you go on and on. That's what's so infuriatingly frustrating about this attitude, is how disingenuous it is and how it lies to people, teaches people to lie to themselves. Now understand, I'm not saying, you've got it really good, shut up and stop playing the victim. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that with full acknowledgement that those people, those kids that are kept at the back of the line in that race, that they are disenfranchised in a lot of ways. What I'm saying is, it is inappropriate, as Peterson says, and yeah, I've been on a big Jordan Peterson kick lately, so expect lots of references just like Ayn Rand. But as Peterson says, you have to compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not who someone else is today. Because the grass will always be greener. There will always be someone that's doing better than you. And if your moral compass is based around making them feel guilty about their successes, or even worse, allowing yourself to be used as a pawn in this asshole's weird, convoluted, nonsensical argument about privilege, if your goal is to, if that's your goal, then I think what you'll find is that you will find yourself ending up, the people around you, the people that you are allying yourself with, will be very much like a movement. There was an internet movement about 10 years ago called True Forced Loneliness. And it was a group of guys. It's still, I guess the incel community is kind of an evolution of that. But it existed about 10 years ago. And it was a group of men on the internet who believed that society was denying them relationships, that like that women were somehow collectively allying against them and denying them love and affection and all of this. And there was one man, I'm not going to say his name because I know he's left the movement and I don't want to, all these years later, I don't want to draw him back into it or into, being associated with it. But there was one man that I remember seeing in that who's a very vocal advocate for this true forced loneliness movement. And he was thrown out of the movement because he got a girlfriend. And that's the thing, misery loves company, but it only loves the company of other misery. So when you've taught people to build their worldview and their existence around resentment and misery, then when you make good for yourself, they're not going to be happy. They're not going to support you in that. And you want them to support, you need them to support you in that. And you, for your sake, need to support them when they do well. For a very simple reason. Because that's what accomplishes the actual, what would be what accomplishes actual social change. And what do I mean by that? Well, there is a point towards the end of the video, or actually about midway through the video, where the guy who's the announcer that's running this thing says, if you win the race, you win the $100, you should, quote, utilize that to learn more about somebody else's story, close quote. Use that to learn more about somebody else's story. Now, I don't know exactly what he means. Does he mean you should feel guilty for winning the race and turn around and go help other people or listen to other people's stories? Does he mean you should take the money and distribute it among the people that didn't win the race? Well, here's what I think you should do. And this video, by the way, ends with 1 John 3:17-18, which is, quote, but if anyone has the world's goods and sees his brother in need, yet closes his heart against him, how does God's love not abide in him? Little children, let us not love in word or talk, but in deed and in truth, close quote. Okay, well, on the one hand, it comes down to the teach a man to fish concept. Do I want to take this money? Let's say that this $100 is just a symbol of extraordinary value that's the result of wealth, or the result of wealth that's a result of privilege. Okay, do I want to take that? What is more helpful? That I take just that money that I have and distribute it to the poor, or that I take that money and start a business and employ those people so that they can start making money and they can become autonomous and they can have autonomy and therefore have agency, and they can start bettering themselves, and then over time they can support their families so that their future generations don't have to grow up missing a parent. It seems like that would be a lot better. It seems like that would be the best possible way to improve things. Because the simple reality is anyone with even a baseline simple understanding of economics should know that you can't just take money and give it out and expect things to get better. It has to circulate and develop in the local economy. That's why you have all of these liberal voices decrying sweatshops and decrying the conditions that capitalist working conditions in developing nations. Well, here's the thing: sweatshops, you can't just go in and start up a new economy in a developing country, in one of these third world countries. You can't just go in and start up a thriving first world economy, you have to build it over time, and you have to build it at the level that it's at then. And sweatshop labor is a step up from the alternative, which is migrant farming. So that's what we don't seem to understand, that you can build people up and you can build up entire nations and entire groups of people, lift people out of poverty, but it takes time and it takes generations, and it takes people working hard at every level, not sitting around being angry that the different levels exist. And what's interesting to me is that I know what I've just said here will be thought of as a conservative position. And I'll emphasize to you again, I do not consider myself to be a conservative at all. I consider myself truly progressive because I want to see progress. And it's so strange to me that the left that calls itself progressive seems interested in nothing more than entropy and stultification. Don't you want things to progress and move forward? Because it's now, right now with videos like this, what it feels like the real stated objective, the real goal, the real aim is feel guilty. Just be really, really aware of how guilty you feel, you ought to feel, for the fact of your existence. And if you ever so much at any point, so much as pose any solution other than taking from one and giving to another by shame or by force, if you ever propose any solution more workable and more useful than that, then you are to be shunned as a bigot and a conservative and a relic of a bygone era. But honestly, I mean, when I identified as a progressive growing up, it was because I thought that it was about moving forward and solving problems, out with the old and with the new. And the welfare state has been is a very old concept indeed, especially the extreme version, the extreme version, the socialist version, is very old indeed, and it has failed and caused extraordinary hardship all over the world. In any event, those are my thoughts. If you are so inclined, please consider supporting this video with a donation to patreon.com/JordanOwen42. No, that is not me asking for a handout, because it is not me appealing to the government. It is me asking you to support the content you enjoy, which, if it is within your means and within your desire, I encourage you to do so. Thank you.